Thanks.
It's a human being. That's what it is. Oh, that was it. That's what I've never seen before. Oh my God, Chris!
Jonathan made that.
It's incredible. It's easy to play the king, but he played the man, and that was what made me cry.
I knew that he had an almost infinite capacity, comparable in some ways to the capacity that Olivier had to make himself into someone almost unrecognizable on the stage.
He has a phenomenal intellect, and I think audiences subliminally recognize that.
Oh my God, the range that this man has is astounding.
In a career that spans more than half a century, Christopher Plummer has played 1,000 parts, from Shakespeare to Broadway, from radio to television to Hollywood. Throughout his career, his need to be challenged has led him to take professional chances that even today continue to amaze his peers. Yet Plummer has always made the performance look easy.
I'm very, very, very fortunate. I'm not like the average actor who grew up sweating his brow and working in kitchens and going from one audition to another. I've sort of started with the top and worked down, if anything. It's just been an amazing piece of luck. I haven't, in that sense, suffered for my art, but I suffer enough inside to hopefully be called an artist.
Outwardly, Christopher Plummer has led what some might call a charmed life. In fact, here in the Connecticut countryside, his life is not that far removed from his beginnings at the family homestead in Centerville, Quebec, more than 70 years ago. Christopher Orme Plummer was born in Toronto to John Plummer and Isabella Abbott on December 13, 1929. His life took a dramatic turn right from the start. When he was only a year old, his parents divorced, and he and his mother moved back to her family home just outside Montreal. In the 30s, divorce was a social taboo, particularly in the refined society that surrounded Centerville.
Those funny old-fashioned divorces, you were really, most Christmas presents that I'd received from him were sent back, so I never saw them. It was a complete cut-off of a life.
As a shy, only child, Christopher was raised by the women in his family, his mother, his grandmother, and his aunts.
They all taught me about literature when I was very young. Every now and then after dinner, somebody would read a book aloud. Of course, I was dying to be on. I wish they'd shut up so I could read. Obviously, I was already itching to be an actor. I was a mimic first. I think that's what really drove me into the theater. I loved imitating people that came to the house. And at a certain early age, I was pretty good at it. I had a good ear, and I loved being cruel, I suppose, and mimic them, the pomposity of them or whatever. I was spoiled rotten in many ways, but they taught me to have enormous respect for my elders. They did teach me manners and how to behave to older people and to listen to them. Because I was young and didn't have many friends my own age, I became attracted to older people, and I found it much more interesting being with my elders. I thank my family for that. And in a sense, that was not spoiling me, but that was training me in the right direction.
Christopher's genteel upbringing had its roots in a distinguished family history. His great-grandfather was Sir John Abbott, Canada's first Canadian-born Prime Minister. But it was his mother, Isabella, who played the biggest part in nurturing Christopher's growing love of the theater.
Mom was extraordinary. She took me to everything. She took me to opera and plays. And the cream of theater came through Montreal, and she would make sure that I was sitting there. It was very useful for anyone going into the arts because you had two whole cultures to learn from.
His education in the arts continued when he was enrolled at Montreal High School. One of his schoolmates was a future jazz legend.
They had a grand piano in Montreal High in the auditorium. I used to go down there at lunchtime and play a bit and practice and what have you. Plus, it would draw a lot of ladies.
Well, I used to go down and try and ham my way along with my way of playing the piano at recess.
I didn't know Chris was doing the same thing.
I had my elite little group, which were pushed aside. And then this mass came in and listened to him. He was already a big star.
But I never even realized he played piano. He's never said a word.
My love of music started very young, and I remember being bowled over by the magic of the lights in the theater, and that was very exciting to me.
The neon glamour of Montreal in the 40s proved irresistible to a teenager already in love with the city's joie de vivre.
It had fabulous nightlife, which at a very early age I became fortunately a part of. I think at 14 you could find me sitting at the Chez Paris. It was a 24-hour city. Duplessis tried to close it so many times that it would not close, and it refused. And I refused to close with it.
It wasn't long before the bright lights and the footlights lured him permanently. After a glowing review from theater critic Herbert Whittaker for his high school performance in Pride and Prejudice, he decided to follow his dream full-time.
When I decided to become an actor, my mother was extraordinary. She said, go, my blessing. And she knew what a risk it was. She was the free spirit. So it was only natural that she would be on my side. She also knew I was absolutely hopeless at anything else. So there was no choice.
Rosanna Seaborn Todd was a longtime friend of the family who shared Christopher's love of the dramatic. In 1945, she started a Shakespearean theater on Mount Royal called the Open Air Playhouse.
At the age of 16 and 17, I was already in her productions, doing Midsummer Night's Dream and As You Like It and Cymbeline. She had a lot of chutzpah. I mean, she hired people from England. Malcolm Morley was a very well-known London director. She also hired Fyodor Komisarevsky, who was one of the gurus of the 20th century. Here I was doing Cymbeline, directed by one of the great directors of the world.
Not only did the Little Playhouse attract big-name directors, it was also the launching pad for another budding young actor.
He seemed like an older guy who was really kind of experienced. I was going to school, he wasn't. He was a professional actor, I wasn't. I kind of looked up to him in those early years.
To earn a living, there was radio, which I played in both French and English. The French had about 9 soap operas a day. I think I was in 2 or 3 of them. And the English had all those Wednesday night 3-hour programs with full orchestra, doing things like Peer Gynt and plays by Eugene O'Neill. William Shatner was a member of that whole gang in Montreal that did those special Wednesday night series. A lot of very fine contemporary actors like John Colicos and Richard Easton and Eleanor Stewart. They grew out of that era with me.
At 18, Christopher left Montreal and a blossoming radio career to join the Canadian Repertory Theatre in Ottawa. He took a chance that it would give him the training he needed to grow as an actor.
I played about 100 plays there. I mean, it was just nonstop. So it was very good training because they never gave us enough time to learn the lines. So we learned to ad lib, we had to.
But nothing could have prepared him for the one role he had never had a chance to play.
The stage manager came back and said, there's a Mr. Plummer who wants to see you. He says he's your father. And I'd never met my father. And I guess I was 17, 18. He came back and I found myself babbling away like mad. I was so nervous. I was nonstop talking. And we went out to the Chateau Laurier, where I took him to the old beverage room, which I knew very well. Did most of my rehearsing in, actually. We both got a little plotzed. And it was between shows, too. I had to go back and do it again. And I liked him very much. He was very nice. But we both kind of knew that it was a bit late.
In Ottawa, he made his film debut in this government-funded industrial produced by Crawley Films.
Frank, how on earth did you manage all this? I'm amazed.
Well, I'll tell you, Mrs. A. I've made a discovery, a wonderful financial discovery.
What was it? Did you strike oil or win a sweepstake or something?
Nothing as sensational as all that.
What was it then?
Well, I'd tell you, Mrs. A, but I don't just know how well the feminine mind can grasp these technical things.
The funny thing was that I found that playing many parts and being all these different people suddenly, I conquered my shyness. I found a kind of courage and a recklessness and a fearlessness.
Christopher developed some of those personalities in the early 50s at CBC Radio in Toronto. Headed by Andrew Allen, the drama department of CBC had become one of the most respected in broadcasting, attracting top performers from around the world.
I miss the glory of radio, which was where productions, they spent money on productions, where the pros really knew what they were doing, and people like Orson and Andrew Allen and John Draney. And I miss those extraordinary people who realized that radio was a medium more than anything else of the imagination. It stirred the imagination. It was like reading a novel, only you did it through the ear, and you could envisage what people looked like who spoke. You didn't realize, of course, that the guy with the golden voice who was the lover was this fat little son of a gun with a balding head who was reading this on a script.
But Toronto's modest theater scene and conservative nightlife couldn't hold the restless young actor who longed to broaden his horizons. He left Canada and the security of the CBC for a chance to do live theater in Bermuda. There he met some of the most influential players on the American theater scene, including Edward Everett Horton and screen legend Ruth Chatterton, who introduced Christopher to New York theater agent Jane Broder.
Her line was, "I know that it's tough because I don't take anyone unless I've seen their work." But then she said, "And how the hell am I going to see your work unless I put you to work?" Which they don't say anymore. So she put me to work. And from then on, I really never looked back.
He began a pre-Broadway tour with Catherine Cornell, a distinguished actress and manager. Toward the end of the tour, one night in Seattle went on too long, and Christopher got a wake-up call he would not forget.
12 noon, somebody came in, and it was the stage manager. I said, "You know, you've just missed the understudy rehearsal, and you're about to miss the matinee." So I tried down coffee, and I strolled over, and they say, "Miss Cornell wants to speak to you." And I passed Tyrone Power's dressing room, and Ty Power went like this. Oh my God, I'm in for it now, man. And I was trying to stay as sober as I could. I was shaking. And she just said, "What you've done is totally unprofessional. And if you don't play this matinee with the professionalism I expect of you, you will not open in New York."
He made it through the performance and went upstairs to pack, certain that he was fired.
Just as we were hitting the door, the stage door opened, and some woman who had come backstage to see Miss Cornell, society lady from Seattle, turned and said, "Oh, Mr. Plummer." And I turned back, and she said, "What a wonderful performance you gave this afternoon." I'm not lying. I thought, oh my God, what a killer this is. I can't bear it. I said, "Thank you, Mama." And I started to go out again, and I looked back, and Miss Cornell was standing behind her, and she did that. Just that. And my life was saved.
It's been more than 50 years since that fateful performance. In 2002, Christopher Plummer was presented with the first ever Jason Robards Award for his lifetime contribution to the Broadway theater.
So you can imagine what this means to me tonight, coming as it does from such a wondrous rogue and such a friend. And if you think for one moment, Jason, that I cultivated our friendship to get this award, you're absolutely right. Jason became perhaps my best male friend. This great craggy face and that sort of soulful eyes which made women absolutely crazy about him. They wanted to save him from whatever sin he was about to commit. Well, I was so jealous of those eyes of his. He could just pull in the broads like nobody could. Son of a gun.
The two friends worked together and they played together. Robarts introduced Christopher to New York nightlife and the best bars in town.
Everybody who was anybody always ended up at P.J. Clark's and stayed till the wee hours of the morning. Lenny Bernstein played the piano. We sang around. And Julie Stein would sit down and play the piano. We would all sit down and play the piano and drink till 8 o'clock in the morning. I remember Jack Lemmon leaving one morning. I think it was Sunday. Saturday night. He suddenly went out in the blinding sunshine. It was about 9 o'clock. We had realized it was so. And Jack came staggering out with all of us and kept saying, "I gotta go to Mass. Where's the nearest?" And he disappeared into the morning. And we kept calling after him, "But Jack, you're not even Catholic." So it was a very confused time. But it was a great camaraderie. It was a great town. You hobnobbed with everyone, society, bums, cops, football players, baseball players, artists, poets, painters. Everybody converged in most places, but particularly P.J. Clark's.
But what an exciting time. Christopher was proving his versatility on Broadway, on television, and in his first feature film, Stage Struck, directed by Sidney Lumet. But it was one particular performance that stole the attention of a young American actress, Tammy Grimes.
But all of a sudden, this man comes on stage, and it's like a knife coming on stage. It just, and kind of went like this, you know, when they're caught in the wood. And that was Christopher Plummer. I looked down and said, "Whoa, Christopher Plummer." And he was so handsome. And I wheedled my way backstage, pretending to be a friend of one of his friends called Donald Harron.
We were doing previews in New York, and she came backstage to see me, that I introduced her to Chris, and that was it.
Tammy and Christopher were married in 1956. The same year, a young and vibrant Canadian theatre company in Stratford, Ontario, beckoned Christopher Plummer home. Michael Langham, the new director at the Stratford Shakespearean Festival, invited Christopher to play the lead in Henry V, the first Canadian to be cast in such a major role at the festival. It was the most important classical part he had ever played.
It was the most exciting season that I've ever had at Stratford, and I think almost one of the most exciting that they've ever had, because it had the two cultures on the same stage at the same time.
Henry V was performed in English and in French, with actors from Montreal's Théâtre du Nouveau Monde.
The game's afoot, follow your spirit, and upon this charge cry God for Harry, England, and St. George!
I must say that there was something like love at first sight between Chris and us. We had a lot of parties. He was as mad as we were. And there was really a very warm relationship.
Christopher was at the top of his game, till one afternoon when he was rushed to the hospital with a suspected kidney stone. William Shatner was his understudy.
About 4 in the afternoon, they called me, and I fitted into his costumes. I'd never rehearsed a move. I looked at people's faces and saw them for the first time, and something magical had happened that night. But that fool got better right away, the resiliency of youth. See, if it happened to him now, it would take a couple of days for him to get better.
With the energy of youth, Christopher plunged into his first leading role in a motion picture. A good career move, perhaps. Except for the wildlife.
The guy who was our technical advisor, Bud Kirk, big burly guy, I noticed that he never seemed to go in the water when there was a scene in which Burl Ives and I had to wade up to our chests in a lagoon, comfortably sitting on the shoreline in some deck chair. Bud would say, guys, if just a little bit further down, and then you're out of alligator territory. Then you're out of alligator territory. You're there. That's about right. Yeah, he was miles away from the shoreline, a coward. We did go out to the island and had dinner sometimes, and there was a little restaurant that served the greatest fish, except it was like a hut. There were only sticks sticking up on it to hold it up. And I remember one of our cracker fellows who lived on the island was with his cousin one night there behind us. And Bud Kirk was always there to make sure that we're all right in this kind of dangerous native territory. And behind us, I hear suddenly guys always playing the guitar. Tosh, his name was, Tosh Brown. And he played Tosh Brown in the movie. He's in the movie. He's always playing the guitar. Playing these sad songs. He just sings like that. He got the deadest voice you ever heard. And it goes on saying, well, suddenly, I heard his cousin, who never spoke, say, Tosh, shut up. I don't make it a Tosh, shut up. And suddenly Bud Kirk said, I think we better clear out now. It's time to go. I said, oh? We're having a ball here. What are you talking about? I haven't finished my... Get out now. Follow me. Just be quiet. We've all gone. We had to go out, leave the restaurant, and as we were leaving, a whole flock of birds flew up because there was a pistol shot that rang through the night. And to this day, I don't know if Tosh and his guitar are still with us or not.
Christopher and Tammy had only been married a year when their daughter, Amanda, was born in 1957.
He brought me a beautiful bouquet of flowers, and the note said, to Bubby 1 from Bubby 2, I'm jealous. And he was jealous. He said, I'm jealous of Amanda. That's the first thing I ever heard him say about having a baby.
Amanda grew up in a show business household. Her parents were busy working actors, and Christopher was focused on his career. His parties were just part of everyday life for Amanda.
I remember, all his buddies. When I'd go to school, I'd walk over their bodies, laying prostrate on the ground, Dad at the piano, George on the floor, Jason over in the corner. That was Dad and Mom, and that was family. And theater folk and other people were just part of the family.
But family life couldn't compete with the nightlife Christopher loved. And eventually, it took its toll on the marriage.
I mean, he could drink and drink and drink and not show it, except that he would become more acerbic. And we'd get into cabs, and he would say, take me to this, and off we'd go, and the cab driver would say something and say, no, I don't want to hear that, I'm telling you how to go. And the cab driver's driving that, they're saying, what have I got in the back here? And he would string these words together, and his vocabulary is wonderful anyway. He would get out, and he'd always pay too much. Then he would hand the person this incredible tip, and he'd say, thank you and fuck you. And you'd go off into the night that way, and I'd always be turning around with my back saying, is he going to get out and hit my husband? Finally, I sat down and I said, listen, I'm going to get the toughest lawyer I can possibly get, and I'm going to get all your money. And he'd say, oh, pooh, say, oh, stop it down, stop it. He said, I don't believe in the law, so go ahead and do what you do. And I was so happy to have spent that time with him as an actress. But as a wife, well, I don't think we had much of a chance. And that was because of the booze.
Meanwhile, Christopher was the toast of Broadway. In the smash hit of the season, the Pulitzer Prize-winning play, J.B., but it would be his last Broadway role for a while. Anxious to try his talent abroad, he accepted a leading role with the most prestigious theatre company in England. At the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford-on-Avon, Christopher found himself in the company of Britain's finest young actors.
Every member of that company, including a couple of spear carriers, went on to become stars in their own right. We had Vanessa Redgrave, she was about 19, 20 at the time. Judi Dench was the youngest of all. And then we had Diana Rigg, Sir John Gielgud, and Dame Peggy Ashcroft, Dame Edith Evans. I mean, we had the cream of English theatre. And I don't think many actors had come over from the other side and played leading roles at England's major theatre. But they treated me with great hospitality. And because, of course, we all went out and got drunk at the Dirty Duck, there was a leveler. If I could drink like the rest of them, and I could, I assure you, I was accepted.
Christopher's performance in Becket made him the talk of London's theatre district. In 1961, he received Great Britain's Evening Standard Best Actor Award for his role as Henry II.
Peter O'Toole was originally going to play the king. He suddenly tore off to the desert to play Lawrence of Arabia. Come on, man! So I took on the role of Henry II. It was the hit of the season, and Peter O'Toole, I remember, came back months later, backstage to see me. First thing he did was he rushed into my dressing room, and he took his pants down and showed me his ass. He said, "You see what they've done, those camels?" He said, "All I do is ride bareback on these bloody things. Look at my ass, look at my ass." He screamed at me in fury. While you're sitting here in luxury playing my part. I could have been safe here playing the king, and you sent me off to... And he went on like this. And I must say it was raw. His ass was raw. And it makes me think, is it still raw, I wonder? Is it still raw after all these years?
To be or not to be? That is the question.
In 1964, he took on a familiar role in a risky production. It was the BBC's first attempt at staging an outdoor television production of Hamlet. His Prince of Denmark won rave reviews, and the show won an Emmy Award.
It was marvelously received. We had a great cast. Robert Shaw was the king. Michael Caine played my Horatio. Donald Sutherland. Donald was still mumbling in those days, and you sort of always want to say, "What? Sorry, didn't miss that." It was kind of unfortunate. It was the wrap-up of the whole play. No, I always tease him about that.
There's haste to hear it, and call the noblest to the audience. For me...
But he was wonderful in it, and God, what a company. Beautifully directed by Philip Saville. And that I was very proud of.
Christopher's second wife, Patricia Lewis, was a young British journalist with the Daily Express. They met when she was assigned to interview the dashing Canadian actor at Stratford-on-Avon.
She was a very bright writer. We went out and she showed me London, and she had an entree to all these places because she was a well-known member of the press. She had a terrible accident, and a very sad accident in which she broke her jaw and had a clot on the brain removed, but she recovered mercifully. And then we married right after that and settled down on Park Street, but our marriage did not last, and I think we'd been thrown together so sort of perhaps passionately and over-dangerously possessive because of her accident, that the energy that we'd expanded through those horrible months almost had drained us dry.
Professionally, his film career was blossoming. Christopher's next challenge came in the form of a movie musical, destined to become one of the most popular films of all time.
When I heard that they were hoping to entice Chris to play Captain Von Trapp in The Sound of Music, I did a lot of praying. And I said, "Oh, please let him say yes," because I knew, A, that he would be wonderful and that he would bring something to the film, and that would be a kind of astringent quality that was really necessary.
Captain, love them all.
I don't care to hear anything further from you about my children.
I am not finished yet,
Oh,
Captain.
yes, you are. You will pack your things this minute.
The whole company, including our director, Robert Wise, recognized that it could be, if we weren't careful, very saccharine. He does have a slightly awesome quality about him. I was scared about working with him at first and wondered if he would be approachable. I think everybody just adored him.
Every journalist seems to come to me, and the first thing they think of is saying, did you call it The Sound of Mucus? And when they say that, It sounds so obnoxious, disgusting and boring and coarse and rude and vulgar that it's awful because the way they ask it. And I say, well, but isn't there more to life than asking me that question? Because all of you ask me the same question. Why? Have you done no homework at all? Yes, I did say that, but so did we all. We all joked about The Sound of Music. You had to, when you do something very delicate and sentimental and coy, in order to avoid being sentimental and coy, you have to joke about it and see the funny side of it. And my friend Doug McClure said, I just saw The Sound of Music. I said, what did you think? She said, it's like being beaten to death with a Hallmark card.
Movies like The Sound of Music and Fall of the Roman Empire brought Christopher international fame. But they also typecast him.
I think people got stuck in their head that I was a classical actor and able to speak well and suggest another period and wear costumes well and look natural in them. As simple as that. And of course, at that time, it was the fashion to do big epics.
Your God is inside you? How can this be? Well, they eat him. First they become a biscuit, and then they eat him.
Fashion took on a whole new meaning in this campy 18th century romp called Lock Up Your Daughters, where Christopher played a character only a future wife could love.
Playing Susanna York's loving maid was this very attractive, very good actress called Elaine Taylor. She was only about 23. I think I was 36 or 7 going on 80.
Now you'll speak for me, Cousin Edgar.
Well, he was very funny. That was my first impression. He was outrageous, in fact. And that was the first thing I noticed. And the fact that he was very, very good in the movie. We would all go along and watch his scenes because we were all very impressed by the performance he was giving.
My eye was on Elaine, and she would have absolutely nothing to do with me. She found me totally unattractive, revolting, in fact, drunk all the time, off screen, and getting fat.
I wasn't drunk all the time, half the time maybe. What was so astounding was that he could give such a wonderful performance when he was, let me say, a little, loose in the legs. But we all, we were in Ireland, and those long shoots, and it was the fashion in those days. I mean, all of his mates and all of those men at the time drank. They didn't do drugs, they didn't do anything else. The thing was liquor. He was ready for someone, I think, to put a bit of order in his life, and I was young enough and had the energy then to do it. We fell in love, and it was good timing, probably on both our parts. And I shouted a lot and threw a few teapots and said, "That's it," and left. Not for that long, but I came back and he was penitent and he tried again.
I quit the scotch and I drank gallons of wine instead. But I quit the real dangerous stuff, the hard stuff. And I started to lose weight. I went and worked out in gyms and got into real shape, and I fell in love with myself as well as Elaine.
On the rare occasions when Christopher slows down, it's here at the Connecticut country home he shares with his wife Elaine. They have been married for 32 years. This is their oasis in the midst of Christopher's hectic schedule.
He loves doing houses. He's got a very good eye, and I'm good with the garden and inside, so it works well. It's a really very boring country life, but it's good. It's very nice. I think when you're young, cities are fabulous. And I can remember thinking, oh, country, God, how ghastly. And I think particularly for an actor, just to have a break and then go back when you have to work is good. And as much as he loves his home, and he has, say, a month off, he's always dying to get back. He always says then he appreciates what he has so much more because he's not there all the time. He likes good-looking dogs. I have the ugly ones. He likes the golden retriever that says, "Daddy, I love you, I'll sit at your feet forever." Useless, but that's what the last dog that died, our golden retriever, I thought my husband would never come out of mourning. It was so serious, much more than if I passed away or anybody, was this friggin' dog.
There is a Renaissance quality about Christopher's life, an air of old-world charm in a modern-day setting. It's a carefully cultivated balance only those closest to him get to see.
When I do see him on stage, I'm always absolutely shocked because I see this, one of the great talents, acting talents ever. And it always shocks me because I think, well, wait a minute, that's the Christopher that I know wandering around in the jogging trousers at home and, you know, mooching about. And it just doesn't somehow go one with the other. This rather shy person that I know at home, this person who shuns seeing other people most of the time, who much prefers to garden. And yet, all the way through all of this is this love of perfection.
By the 1970s, Christopher was in constant demand, dividing his time between stage and screen in Europe and North America.
Commanders of armies have something better to do than to fire at each other.
The Russian-made Waterloo, in which I was in, which was the biggest epic I've ever been in, that sort of killed the epic for a long time. So much money had to be spent on it, and some of it was absolutely wonderful. But the manpower was just extraordinary. The people in that film who played the army was actually 1/3 of the actual number at the Battle of Waterloo. And we had 10,000 horse, and we had 20,000 men. And they were all soldiers in the Russian army. It was amazing. They could sleep on the hill with their horses at night.
In 1972, he won a Tony Award as the lead in the musical version of Cyrano. But it was in his 1975 portrayal of Rudyard Kipling in The Man Who Would Be King that gave his career a whole new direction.
And now, sir, let me introduce you to Brother Peachy Carnahan, which is him, and Brother Daniel Dravert, which is I.
John Huston had wanted Richard Burton to play Kipling because they were all drinking buddies, I think. And Richard, I don't think he was very well at that time. So I was next on the list, and I grabbed it. I'm glad I did, because it made a mark, that little part of Kipling, and it certainly helped me go into the character acting end of things. Before that, I'd been a rather innocuous leading man in movies, and now I was coming into my own with character parts, because I'm really a character actor.
On the parts that now came his way.
There had to be some reason why he was so evil. So he decided that he hated women because he wanted to be one.
A female, that I never let him off the hook after that. He came down the escalator and he had the nail polish on, the lipstick, and of course the clothes. And I was sitting there, you know, ogling him, throwing him kisses, and so what?
But nothing could keep Christopher away from the theater for long. In 1982, he was pulled back to Broadway to appear in Othello opposite James Earl Jones. The New York Times called his portrayal of Iago the best single Shakespearean performance to have originated on the continent in our time. It involved some audience participation.
We were touring before we hit Broadway in Baltimore one night, and it was very hot on the stage, and I had a sort of quite a quick, spectacular little duel as Iago in the first act. And I'm going, but suddenly, my hand was sweaty, and the sword just suddenly slipped out of my hand, and I went straight into a seat right where a lady was sitting in the front row. It went, and I thought, oh my God, I've impaled this lady. Or I've got her eye or something. There was a terrible sort of from the audience, and I jumped off the stage and grabbed the sword, and I remember saying, "Are you all right?" She said, "Oh yes, I'm fine." It missed her, it missed the eye just like that, and embedded itself in the back of in the material in the chair.
He received a Tony Award nomination for Othello. In the same year, his daughter Amanda won a Tony for Agnes of God. Acting was her inheritance.
To me, these actors, like my father, are like Don Quixote. And I loved that. as a young kid. Watching him, he gave me incredible examples. And his complete absorption and work and love of work.
I have so wanted to meet you, Captain. One warrior to another. Right.
From Shakespeare to Star Trek, Christopher never refused a challenge or the chance to camp it up with his former understudy.
I shall blow you out of the stars.
And I said, if you could get Christopher Plummer to play that role, I will give you my eye teeth and my left finger. It was wonderful.
Shields! And let's slip the dogs of war. Fire!
In 1994, Christopher teamed up with his old friend Jason Robards in Harold Pinter's No Man's Land. It would be their last performance together.
We had a marvelous time with Spooner and Hearst. It was us, really, and it was as if for 1 second perhaps Pinter had written it for us. It felt that way, and it was very, very touching, very moving, and that was a great experience. Sadly, of course, Jason's gone now, so we can't plan another play, which would have been nice.
In 1997, at an age when many actors would be winding down their careers, he embarked on a difficult and demanding role, a one-man Broadway show about the rise and fall of the legendary American actor John Barrymore. Christopher had often been compared to Barrymore, and he relished the chance to explore the similarities.
You probably hadn't noticed, but I tend to stagger. My whole family staggers. I come from a long line of staggerers. My father, God rest his soul, was a great staggerer. Staggering is a sign of strength, Jackie, he would say. Only the weak have to be carried home.
It's rather close to me, Barrymore. Not only do I not resemble him a little bit, and always did, but I always admired him. And I knew his daughter, Diana. So I felt that if anybody should play it, it was me.
For 20 years, Catherine and I were ecstatically happy. And then we met.
One moment he was a dashing, handsome young man. The next he was, in a second, he became an old, drunken sot and a pathetic figure.
I couldn't believe the success. I think everybody in Hollywood, everybody of the old guard and everybody that was in that audience at one point or another. The stage manager kept the list of people coming backstage. I've never seen so many famous people in my life.
Barrymore. Henry, no. Well, Barrymore. Barrymore was incredible. Incredible piece of work. And it's wonderful to see somebody, only Julie Harris to me was able to do that, to get on a stage by herself and give you an entire cast of characters, and all of whom were fully brought to life. And in that case, I never met Barrymore, but I can't imagine that he didn't create every aspect of him that was possible.
It got a lot of attention, and with the theatre, it sort of jump-started his movie career again. Michael Mann came to see it, and he got The Insider.
Today, CBS News President Eric...
Playing the veteran journalist Mike Wallace presented a formidable challenge. Without any physical resemblance to rely on, Christopher had to depend on his natural ability for mimicry.
Where the hell's the rest?
Nebraska football fans voiced their criticism.
You cut it! You cut the guts out of what I said.
It was the time consideration,
Mike. Bullshit! You corporate lackey. Who told you your incompetent little fingers had the requisite skills to edit me?
I had to do it with my voice, and the voice was close, and I certainly had to be exactly like him in clips of the actual television interviews that he did, that we shot. That I did verbatim, because I listened to them and I got the inflections and all that. But once you're in the office and outside in the script, doing other scenes, you can be free to be yourself as long as you keep the tone of Mike Wallace.
What do you want? My name is Rosen.
When director Ron Howard was casting A Beautiful Mind, he needed an actor who could handle the difficult role of the psychiatrist, Dr. Rosen.
this character of Rosen needed to be able to sort of work with our emotions. So Russell Crowe brings up the idea of Christopher Plummer. My mind immediately flashed to this one-man show where he was Barrymore. And I remember at that time just saying, oh my God, the range that this man has is astounding. You know, and thought he was a perfect candidate. I only wished I'd thought of the idea instead of Russell Crowe.
Russ was terrific. He thinks of me as a good luck piece, because every film that I'm in with him, he wins or gets nominated for an Academy Award.
Christopher has won his own share of awards over the years. Dozens, in fact. Including a Governor General's Award for the Performing Arts for a lifetime contribution to the theater.
Christopher Plummer, and Claire Poirier.
Yes.
You do 4 lines from there, I'll do...
Christopher Plummer has played the major stages of the world, but these days you're just as likely to find him a stone's throw from home at the Westport Country Playhouse, where he's a member of the Artistic Advisory Council. He is generous in his devotion to the dramatic arts and supports a number of theater organizations, large and small. At a fundraiser here recently, he performed his own one-man show of readings and poetry. A word or two before you go.
He was up there for 90 minutes by himself, solo, and I was a nervous wreck because I knew he hadn't done it in a while. And he came striding down the aisle. And even though Chris, I was saying, oh God, nobody wants to see this kind of thing. They don't want to see this. And I said, yes, of course they want to see it. Well, of course the audience just went crazy as he walked down the aisle and up on the stage and owned the stage instantly. And I don't think anybody breathed for 90 minutes.
He was always here for the Christmas show. He's on the advisory board. He's
comes to
very
meetings.
Generous.
Other people are on the advisory board, but you never see them. Chris is there. If he's in town, he's there for the meeting.
3, 2, 1, action.
At 73, Christopher is as busy as ever, averaging about 4 major projects a year.
Нету человека, нету проблем.
Товарищ министр, в Канаде даже мой чиновник есть.
Имеем право на справедливый суд.
Here's to Canadian fairness.
You know what goes through my mind, Rafi? I wonder if I should feel sorry for them. They're usually kids around your age. I'm about to destroy their lives. I know they're sorry for what they've done and they'll never go through it again, but the action has been taken. It's too late.
I had to go there.
I have no doubt about that. A flame was lit in your heart. You thought things would be clarified by going there.
I had Chris in mind from the very beginning as I was writing this role, because I realized that David, who plays a customs officer, is at once a gatekeeper, so someone who has a degree of authority, but is also someone who's very curious and likes his job because he gets to speak to people and to draw out their story. And I really had this perception of Chris in mind that we all have of someone who's quite patrician and someone who's vaguely intimidating. With this other side that I also knew, which is his real self, which is very warm and very, very curious and attentive. And I thought that this would be a great role to bring those two things together.
He's violent. He's easily upset. He slaps people a lot. I'm not wearing my face guard now, but when I go back in there. No, he's a joy to work with. For me, as a writer-director, it's wonderful to have an actor whose intelligence is so present. We talk about every scene. He always brings the smartest kind of thinking to a scene, often doing the unheard of thing, which is to suggest that he not say certain lines because he feels they're redundant.
You must bear up against sorrow, Mom. I always do.
You can give him any direction, any sensible one, and he can do it. He is never unable. He's always able to do what you want, and it only deepens what the part is. I think his performance is one of the marvels of the film. He is the villain of the piece.
I will listen to every rumor and every rumble until I can strike him. And then I will strike him until he can be struck no more.
It was very important to me. Before I accepted this part, I was very keen to know who would be playing Ralph. So I couldn't think in England who it might be. And then when Doug said it would be Chris, I was delighted.
Noggs, where is morning paper that I left on my desk?
On my desk.
Bring it to me.
Bring it to me, bring it to me.
Stop parroting me.
I wish I was a parrot. I'd fly away.
I wish you were a parrot too. I'd wring your neck.
Like, I grew up watching him in movies, and it's always a delight not only to work with people that you admire, but to find out that they're really nice as well, you know.
Here at London's newly reconstructed Globe Theatre, Christopher is seeing a long-time dream come true.
We reckoned it was. And it's a fortunate height. They were a very dangerous group of people in that time. Not so much now, but you think Ben Jonson killed a man in the yard of a theatre. But there was a lot of robbery going on here, and of course, a lot of people were coming for the prostitution, for the sensual pleasures which were on show in the upper gallery.
Oh, were they selling their wares?
Oh, yeah.
Keep that tradition going?
We try, we don't do so well. But
For years, he and a group of friends had tried to have the 17th century outdoor Shakespearean theatre restored to its former glory. But it was American actor and director Sam Wanamaker who finally had the Globe rebuilt. It reopened in 1997. It was renowned British director Jonathan Miller who convinced Christopher to tackle the most difficult role a veteran actor can play.
I said, well, how about Lear? It's about time. It really is about time you did Lear. Without wishing to be rude, Chris, you are old enough to do it. It's one of those difficult plays in that the main actor is supposed to be, very, very old and possibly senile, but no one who is old and senile can actually possibly perform it. It's an enormous test of stamina and endurance.
Lear is the ultimate challenge, an exhausting 3-hour performance that some call the Everest of Shakespearean roles.
When he pleads with the fool and says, "Let me not go mad," I mean, it's just heartbreaking that someone should know that could happen and ask you not to let it happen. And then you, in the course of what you do as your character, let it happen because you don't know how to stop it. And you can't stop it. And it's just... And then he comes back to it through Cordelia. It's a hell of a journey to make in 3 hours and 10 minutes, I'll tell you.
He's got everything, Christopher. He's got power, he's got danger, he's got a great voice, he's got magnetism, he's got sex appeal, he's got humor. I mean, everybody, all the young actors of my generation wanted to be Christopher Plummer, but there's only one of him.
He has a great gift.
He
can take a piece of direction in which he is extremely uncomfortable about, pursue it, and then turn this questionable piece of direction that he's been given into a marvelous bit of behavior that he owns completely.
Chris is totally original. You can't compare him to anybody else. He's an absolutely unique, one-of-a-kind. His presence, the personality, the way he makes his choices, they are Christopher Plummer, not anybody else.
Chris is a very generous actor to work with because he really does give. And I think that is so important. To me, that's the way I was raised by my father, that if you give on stage to other actors, then the receiver must be the audience, and so therefore the production must take on a brighter and better quality.
He is a throwback to the theatrical legends of the, gosh, who knows how far back you want to go. It all starts with his nose, and it's regal. and his voice and his demeanor and his flamboyance and his joy and his remarkable flexibility.
You don't want to waste Christopher Plummer. You want to come up with something really good for him because he's really one of the fine actors out there.
His lifelong love affair with acting shows no sign of ending. There's always a new role, a new stage to conquer. But for Christopher, there will only be one stage that can satisfy his true passion.
My first love, my real love, no matter how drudging and unglamorous it is, will always be the theater. You see, what education I got from the theater. It taught me about life, even before I'd lived it. And above all, it introduced me to the glories of language. It is, in a way, the temple of great language, a place where one worships the written word at its most majestic, at its most exalted.